the flagship program in this state, right? And
a bullshit, a bullshit, a bullshit, a bullshit.
Hello, everybody. Good evening, and welcome back into another thrilling episode of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. It was a humongous weekend for the Longhorns in baseball and on the NFL draft stage. We'll get into all of that. We're also going to be doing our 2024 post-spring ball SEC football power rankings with the new SEC that will formulate officially on July 1st. So we're just about 2 months away from Texas and Oklahoma officially being in the SEC. How is everybody tonight? If you're tuning in live, make sure you like and subscribe as it says there on the bottom of your screen. Share this with your friends, especially if they are Longhorn or college football fans. And thank you guys for tuning in. We greatly appreciate it. Before we get into it, joining me live from Austin, Texas, a man of many obligations, but a man that loves the Longhorns himself and is an NFL draft nerd like me, Mr. Emmy Nixon. What's up?
Nothing much, man. I watched a lot of this year's draft, and seeing 11 players go, as we're going to get to tonight, pretty big time, man. Like it's cool to see for sure, and this is definitely what you want to see. Like getting the ball rolling like this, seeing guys like Jordan Whittington get drafted, Ryan Watts go off the board as well. Like some guys that we thought maybe weren't gonna go off the board at all, but did in on day 3. So big time stuff, man.
Yes, indeed. So why don't we just start there, since that's where we've already kind of led into. The Longhorns, in case you missed it or were living under a rock, had 11 players drafted in the 2024 NFL draft. They sent 11 guys to the combine, and all 11 of them heard their name called before the 7th round even began. If I'm not mistaken, they had 2 first-round picks. They had 2 second-round picks. Then they had, I believe it was 3 fourth-round picks. I think 3 fourth-round picks. So that's 7. And then they had 2 sixth-round picks. What am I missing?
I know there was 6 on day 3, but I don't know.
Anyways, we'll pull that up here in a second. So let's start with this. Obviously, we want to talk about the players that got selected first. So I have a couple of questions for discussion here. Number one, out of the Longhorns that were available to get drafted, which of them, if any, got selected either earlier or later than you thought they would?
Well, I think first things first, I think it's Adonai Mitchell. I think him dropping to 52 after being a guy that we thought, at the lowest was going, top 40 and most likely even like late first, like very early second round. So him dropping to the Colts, I think, is a really good fit for them. They have a group of 3 guys now with Pittman, Downs, and now Mitchell, 2, legitimate guys on the outside with good size and speed. So he's a really good fit there. I thought that was a steal. Then I want to definitely shout out to Tavondre Sweat as well. We didn't really know what to think with him, like after him getting a DUI like 2 weeks before draft day. Nobody really knew how that would really affect him, but him going 38, I think it was right around what we originally thought he would go. But after the DUI, we thought maybe, he might drop a little bit. But it was good to see him still go decently early.
So let me correct myself. It was 2 first-round picks, Byron Murphy to Seattle, Xavier Worthy to Kansas City, 3 second-round picks. It was T'Vondre Sweat to Tennessee, as you mentioned, Jonathan Brooks to the Panthers at 46, and then Adonai Mitchell to the Indianapolis Colts at 52. It was 1 fourth-round pick, Jatavion Sanders to Carolina at 101. 3 fifth-round picks, starting with Christian Jones to Arizona at 162. 5 picks later, Keelan Robinson, 167 to Jacksonville, and 175, Jalen Ford to New Orleans. And then 2 sixth-round picks, Ryan Watts to Pittsburgh at 195, and Jordan Whittington, a guy who we were really unsure whether or not he was going to get drafted, although he did get the invite to the Senior Bowl, which a lot of people did not expect. He gets drafted by the Rams at 213 in the 6th round. So not only did the Longhorns have 11 players selected in what was a historic draft, their most players selected in the 7-round draft era, which began in 1994. Their second most players drafted ever. They had 17 players drafted back in 1984. However, that was when the draft was still 12 rounds. Yes, people, the draft used to be 12 rounds long. Now it's only 7 rounds long.
Yeah,
so it was a historic draft, but there were also some other nuggets. It was, I believe, the first draft ever for Texas where they've had at least 2 players drafted in 4 different rounds. They had 2 in the first, 3 in the second, 3 in the fifth, and 2 in the sixth. So there were some historic markers here. And if you look at it in the overall totality of the draft, Texas had the second most players total drafted. It was Michigan, the national champions, with 13, Texas with 11, and then there were like 3 or 4 schools tied at 10. And so my surprise, and I agree with your surprises, I think Adonai Mitchell baffles me, the fact that he dropped to 52. But not only that he dropped to 52, he was the 11th wide receiver drafted.
Yeah.
And I know that it's a very deep wide receiver class, but based on talent and tape alone, I did not believe that there were 10 wide receivers, much less maybe 5 wide receivers better than Adonai Mitchell in this class. However, Ian Rappaport reported this. I think Schefter kind of reported this. It was reported that teams had some character concerns with Adonai Mitchell, fair or not. And what Rappaport said, and I'm paraphrasing, was he just seemed kind of disinterested and he didn't have good interviews. And that plays a part in it. So fair or not, I don't agree with it. I think that guy is a first-round talent. I actually expected him to be, if not the second Longhorn drafted, the third Longhorn drafted. But it is what it is. I think he goes to a really nice situation in Indianapolis. And Indianapolis gets great value on that pick. After they stole Leatu Latu at, 15 or 16?
15, yeah.
First round.
Yeah.
The best edge rusher in the draft, in both of our opinions.
The first defensive player taken. Or second defensive player taken.
But the real surprise to me, I wasn't really surprised that Jatavion Sanders fell to early on day 3 in the 4th round to Carolina. We kind of heard after he had some lackluster testing that might be the case. He didn't really have the elite production at the college level to, I guess, offset the lackluster testing at the combine and at his pro day. Like his pro day wasn't great either, I didn't think. But I did think, aside from that, and the two you mentioned, I thought that Keelan Robinson going in the 5th round, 167 to Jacksonville was a little bit of a surprise to me. I thought he could get drafted, especially because he can come in right away for you and be an excellent special teams player. He was that for Texas during his 2 years in Austin. Like, he was one of Texas's better special teams players, especially on punt team and punt coverage, along with kickoff. But I thought when he touched the ball this past year, he was kind of a explosive play waiting to happen. We obviously know he scored twice in the second half, one on a long run down the left sideline in the Oklahoma State Big 12 championship game. But he's fast. He's got some pop to him. He can catch the ball in the backfield. Like, he just has some versatility. I didn't quite expect him to go in the 5th round, maybe in the 6th or 7th round. But when you think about it, with the new kickoff rules that have been implemented into the NFL for this upcoming season to encourage more kickoff returns, and Roger Goodell talked about this before the draft even started, there could be more of a use for a guy like Keelan Robinson who you can use on kick return. So I do think when you really drill down into the reasons beyond surface level production at the college level, it does make more sense that he did go 5th round, and congratulations to him. And that's another part of this is, for back-to-back years now, Texas has had not one, but 2 running backs drafted. And in both years, they had the first running back off the board. Last year it was Bijan. This year it was Jonathan Brooks. So those were the surprises. I think we covered it all. The second question for you is, from my standpoint, and this kind of goes like onto the recruiting side of things, and just from a Texas program standpoint alone, do you think that moving forward, this will kind of be the new norm? Meaning, do you think Texas can sustain moving into the SEC with the way that they're recruiting and the way that they're able to get guys from the portal that are NFL caliber talents? Do you think they'll be able to sustain having around 10 draft picks each year? And if not double digits, like in the 7, 8, 9, 10 range. Do you think this is sustainable?
I think so. Yeah, for sure. I think there's like guys you point to already that I think are NFL talent on this team. Like Isaiah Bond, we brought in. I think the defensive end from UTSA that we brought in as well is an NFL talent. Like, besides, the obvious suspects in Quinn Ewers and Kelvin Banks, like there's so much talent that I think might even be like overlooked just because they don't, like, there's so many mouths to feed on this team. But at the end of the day, like, NFL teams are going to see the talent and see that they're worth a draft pick.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely sustainable. We can talk about all the players they might send to the combine and get drafted in 2025. I mean, just off the top of my head, Kelvin Banks, Quinn Ewers, Isaiah Bond, Barron Sorrell, Jade Barron, You mentioned Trey Moore, Andrew Makuba is going to get drafted. There's Ethan Burke, if he has a big year, could be one of those guys.
Yeah.
I think Alfred Collins could get drafted. And that's just off the top of my head. But from a recruiting standpoint, this does wonders because Texas is no longer a punchline come NFL draft weekend. Like, oh, where are all the Texas players? They have all this talent, but they don't get players drafted. And if they do, they're not getting players drafted in the first round. And this year, you saw, this is the result of two things. Number one, Steve Sarkisian actually inherited most of the players who were drafted this year. 7 of the 11 that were drafted were signed and recruited by Tom Herman. So Tom Herman does get a little bit of credit for recruiting these guys, but where Sarkisian and this staff comes into play is the development of those guys.
Yeah.
And look, Sarkisian's first full high school recruiting class was the 2022 signing class. And those guys won't really be draft eligible until 2025. But what they did was they maximized the talent that they had on hand, and they added to that talent by getting 3 straight top 6 recruiting classes and some key transfer portal additions, like A.D. Mitchell.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they did. And they developed them. You think about Byron Murphy, you think about Tavondre Sweat, those two guys who eventually became the best defensive tackle duo in college football last year. They're prime examples of the critical player development gains that Texas has made significant strides in that department the past 2 years. The first year, it was a little rough in that 5-7 season, but the past 2 years, we saw massive strides. Even last year, I thought Tavondre Sweat played some really good football. It was just he went from really good to the best interior defensive lineman in the country, Outland Trophy Award winner, and a guy whose talent and whose physical makeup can still get him drafted in the second round despite all of the other questions that there are off the field. Byron Murphy was rated a 3-star recruit by 2 of 3 major recruiting services that existed when he signed. Sweat was also a 3-star. He was ranked 605th overall in the 2019 24/7 Sports Composite ranking. So those guys went from rotational developmental guys to fierce defensive tackles that were drafted in the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft. Jalen Ford, guess what? He's another example of this. He was a 3-star in the 2020 class. And not only was he a 3-star, he was the lowest rated recruit that Texas signed in that class. And he became an All-American under the tutelage of Steve Sarkisian. He became an All-Big 12 first-team linebacker, best at his position. And while his production fell off a little bit this past year, to what it was in 2022 when he had all those interceptions and was making all those plays, he still got himself drafted in the 6th round and could have a very long and sustainable NFL career. Jonathan Brooks, another example. Yes, they were able to inherit Jonathan Brooks, and he started his career behind Bijan Robinson, who Sark did recruit. But at the same time, when he got his chance, Tashard Choice, who has to be mentioned in this conversation, got got that guy to the league. And he got that guy to the league off an ACL injury into the second round. But on the other side of the equation, like 5 stars do matter. They're not the end all be all, but they do absolutely matter. A guy like Jatavion Sanders, who was a 5-star, and an explosive weapon at the tight end position. Xavier Worthy, who was a blue chip guy, maybe wasn't quite a 5-star coming out, but he was a high 4-star. You see where he ends up. And then transfers Keelan Robinson, Ryan Watts, and Adonai Mitchell, they all got drafted as well. So you can see like this coaching staff is doing it from every angle. You want to transfer into Texas, play 1 year here, and then go make your payday in the NFL. You can do that, and we can now point to guys that we've done that with. We have evidence of doing that. You want to come in here as a 3-star and get picked in the first round? Yeah, we can do that too. You want to come in as a highly recruited 5-star, like the guys that they just had come in here recently, Arch Manning, Jonte Cook in the 2023 class, Anthony Hill, Colin Simmons, Kobe Black. Yeah, we can get you to the NFL. It's huge for recruiting. Absolutely massive, because before this wasn't happening. And so I recommend that you go read Sam Kahn's article on The Athletic that he wrote about Texas in this NFL draft, and Steve Sarkisian, because I read it before this podcast, and it's absolutely excellent. But
I actually have it open right now, actually.
those are just like some of the major examples of why this is so big for recruiting, not only at the high school level, but in the portal, which is more of a speed dating form of recruiting, as we know. And then also just from a development standpoint, this is what Texas did not get under Tom Herman and Charlie Strong. So that's why it's big for recruiting and from that standpoint. Now, before we move on to a different subject, I want you to pick 3 Texas guys, looking at the list of guys who were drafted and the teams they were drafted by. Who do you think landed in the best situations, and who fits the best with the team that they got drafted by, in your opinion? Choose 2 or 3 of them that stand out to you.
All right, let's see here. I think Brooks to Carolina is a really good fit. Him paired with Bryce Young in that offense, what they're trying to build. They just need a more stable running game, and I think he brings that. His vision, his toughness, I think he brings that to the table. That's what they need. I can't go with answering that question without mentioning Byron Murphy. I think
Yes.
he has all pro potential. Like, I think come 2025, 2026, when we're talking about the best defensive tackles in football, I think Byron Murphy is going to be on that short list. And I would be really surprised if he's not. And that's just how good he is. Let's see. I think the other guy I should mention is probably I think JT Sanders to Carolina also. Carolina made some really good moves this offseason. I actually think they're having a really underrated like what they're like this draft paired with what they did in free agency, bringing in Deontay Johnson and a few other guys on the offensive line. Like, I think they're building something really good there. And I think getting a strong hands catcher like JT Sanders is a huge get for them in the 4th round.
Yeah. So I'll play off your Byron Murphy choice. That's hard not to mention here. He's versatile. You can move him around. He's explosive. He uses his hands extremely well. And he'll fit like a glove into that Mike McDonald defense. I mean, you think about the players that Baltimore had on their defenses of past years. A guy like Justin Matabike, like I feel like that's the kind of player they're looking for in Byron Murphy. And you can talk about his size all you want. He's different, and we've seen guys of his build actually turn out to be some of the best defensive linemen, not only ever, like if you want to talk about Aaron Donald, but we've seen Grady Jarrett, we've seen name some other undersized defensive linemen, Geno Atkins, like
Jeffrey Simmons.
Jeffrey Simmons. Yes, I think that's fantastic. And I was listening to something earlier today, and Dane Brugler, who is the number one draft guy for the Athletic, was talking about how Seattle, based on how the board fell, they absolutely loved Byron Murphy. Like they were stressing the last 15 minutes before they got on the clock, hoping that nobody would take Byron Murphy before they got up to pick. And if he wasn't there, they were ready to trade back. That's according to Dane Brugler of The Athletic. Because remember, they didn't have a second round pick. So if they didn't have the guy that they really, really wanted at 16, I think they would have traded back to acquire some more capital since they did not have that pick. Before we move on, a couple other guys I actually really liked. I do think as long as he keeps his wits about him and he can stay in relative shape, keep his weight below 370, because there were reports that he played the Sugar Bowl north of 390, and that's a little bit concerning. But I do think if Tavondre Sweat can keep his wits about him, mature a little bit off the field, and just keep his weight under control, I do think he could have a good amount of success in Tennessee, because I kind of view it a little bit similar to what he had this past year with Jeffrey Simmons. I do think the presence of Jeffrey Simmons next to him, like he had in Byron Murphy, will help him quite a bit.
Yeah.
So I think that's actually a decent situation as long as he keeps his wits about him and keeps his weight under control. Adonai Mitchell is too obvious. Like, I think that's going to work in Indianapolis. I think Indianapolis is building something really, really nice for 2024. But I did like Ryan Watts to Pittsburgh. He's probably not going to play a lot this year on the defense, but he just, I think, from a toughness and size, from his measurables as a bigger, more physical corner, they can move him to safety if they want to. I think he'll be probably a free safety in the league.
Yeah.
I think that could work, especially in Pittsburgh's style of defense, especially as kind of like a run defender. He has some versatility, and he's the kind of guy that kind of fits in with what the Steelers did this draft. Hard nose, good tackler. I think it's a good spot for him. But that's not to say like some of these other guys like Xavier Worthy will probably fit like a glove in Kansas City. I love both guys going to Carolina. I do think Christian Jones will hopefully find his role in Arizona. And Jalen Ford, they lost Demario Davis, I believe, so he could be competing to try to get on the field for them relatively sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think everyone landed in a pretty good spot. And overall, it was just a historic draft on all cylinders for the Longhorns.
Yeah, definitely. And one last thing on Sweat real fast is like he has it in, like, his career is in his hands right now. Like you mentioned it, but if this works out, like, it's a rare player, like a 3 down nose tackle with legit run stuffing and pass rushing ability. That's a once every 3 to 4 years type of player. I think Jordan Davis was the last style of guy that was kind of in that mold taken. He went like 13th. And I think Devondre Sweat probably had better tape than he did at Georgia. So if he, as you said, if he gets it together, you're looking at, like, there's not a lot of guys that can make a bigger impact than someone of his athletic mold.
Yeah, because you can't teach what he has.
Yeah.
With his physical build. So with all that being said, we can move on to our next topic, which is our 2024 post-spring SEC football power rankings. And so the way this is going to work is I have my top 10 laid out, but we might only go through the top 8. I don't really know. I was thinking I'd give you my list and then you give me your list, and then we can just kind of talk about it rather than going back and forth and each saying some of the same things about each team. So I'll go ahead and start us off here. And this is based on what you did in the offseason, so kind of who you lost, but also who you gained through the transfer portal, your big transfer portal additions, what you had coming back. Like, how much do you have coming back? And then a little bit of projection. It's not a ton of projection here. It's not like I went through all 10 of these schedules and checked off where I think they'll win and where I think they'll lose, but it's a projection based on roster talent, not how many games they'll actually win based on their actual schedule on the field in 2024, if that makes sense. At least my list is. So the way I have it laid out is I have my top 5 is so my top 5 is Georgia 1. Okay. That probably doesn't surprise a whole lot of you. Texas number 2. Ole Miss number 3. Alabama number 4. And I went back and forth on the Ole Miss Alabama side. I think you could flip-flop them and there wouldn't be too much of an argument from me. I have Missouri number 5. I have Tennessee 6, LSU 7. Let's see. Oklahoma 8. Kentucky 9 and A&M 10. Those were my top 10.
Okay.
Did you have a ranking?
Yeah. So I had Georgia 1, Texas 2, same as you. I flipped Alabama and Ole Miss. I had Alabama at 3, Ole Miss at 4. I think them getting Caleb Downs back at tackle was pretty big for them. And I also think their quarterback can take another step forward come next year. But I think that's pretty tight there. At 5, I've got LSU. 6, Missouri. 7, I've got Oklahoma, and then 8, I have Tennessee, and that's the 8 that I had prepared. I would have, just off the top of my head, I'd probably have Texas A&M 9 and Florida 10, I think.
Okay. Well, first of all, Georgia is the undisputed one, right?
Yeah.
They return Carson Beck at quarterback. They return 5 senior starters on defense. And they added some very talented players through the portal, as you would expect Kirby Smart to do. They added Florida's starting running back, Trevor Etienne, through the portal. They added Miami's Colby Young at the X receiver position and Vanderbilt's best receiver, London Humphreys, at the Y wideout spot. That makes them formidable once again at the wide receiver position after losing Ladd McConkey to the NFL draft. And look, their schedule is tough, but I think with those upperclassmen returning on defense, with the step that I expect Carson Beck to take, I think their running game is going to be better just because I think they have a higher level of talent in Trevor Etienne, who will be running behind a better offensive line. I think they'll be good at the wide receiver spot, really good on defense. Next year, they'll put another 10, 12 guys into the NFL draft. Like, until proven otherwise, I do think with Carson Beck potentially being in the Heisman conversation to win the award, they're number one. Texas, we don't have to explain really why they're number two. I think they got a relatively you never want to say easy schedule in the SEC because I don't think any such thing exists. But for their first year, it could have been a lot worse than it is. You look at who they play: Kentucky, Mississippi State, Florida. Like, a lot of the teams aside from Oklahoma and Georgia are projected to finish in the bottom half of the conference. And that's not to say that they can't lose some of those games, but that's not really what this is about. I think the talent on the roster speaks for itself. Like, it's in terms of talent, just overall talent from a recruiting standpoint, it's Georgia 1, and then it's Alabama and Texas 2, and then there's a gap between that and the next tier of team in the SEC. So I do think with the injection of talent that Texas got through the portal, the quality of player, the emergence of some of these younger guys, while they did lose the two interior defensive line studs, I think they'll be stronger elsewhere to kind of compensate for that. And I expect Quinn Ewers to take a massive step, which we didn't quite get to see in the spring game. But I think that's something, like you said, about some of these other quarterbacks that you can expect from a lot of the quarterbacks in the top 5, top 6 of the SEC. I expect Ole Miss to be really good this year. I think they look like a college football playoff team. Jackson Dart returns offensively. They bring in Juice Wells at the receiver spot. If Kingshawn Judkins, the running back, would have stayed and not left for Ohio State, I think you could make an argument they'd be number 2. They add some really good players on defense. 6 starters on defense from the portal, including Walter Nolan, who was by far the best defensive tackle in the portal and is a projected first-round pick next year from A&M. I like them at number 3. I like Alabama 4. Kalen DeBoer, given his track record and his past success as a head coach, he's won everywhere he's gone, plays a lot into that. They did have some portal departures, obviously, when Saban retired, but there's still a ton of talent on that roster. I love Milroe, the quarterback, Jalen Milroe. I think he could take another step. I still kind of want to see how he'll fit in the DeBoer offense. That's a little bit of a question mark. I want to see this receiving core, which will include Jeremy Bernard, who was kind of the number 4 at Washington last year, along with some freshmen in the secondary. Given what they lost in the secondary, that's also kind of a question for me with Cooley, McKinstry, Terry, and Arnold leaving. But the way that they recruit, given that Kalen DeBoer's won everywhere he's gone, the fact that they're really good in the trenches, they're number 4 and they're not far off Ole Miss. And then Missouri LSU is an interesting conversation. I did give the edge to Missouri just because I think that LSU still has, while they did massively improve from a defensive coaching staff standpoint in the offseason, going to get Bo Davis from Texas as the defensive line coach, making some other high-level hires on the defensive staff, as that defensive staff last year was just in over its head. And they do return Harold Perkins. Like, I do think they were awful last year defensively. I think they have, even if they take a massive step, I still think they could be below average. Now, that'll help. Like, that will improve the team. But they did lose a good amount offensively. Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors, Jaden Daniels, who won the Heisman. And I just think that despite how talented they are, I'd give Missouri the edge, given I know more about their quarterback, Brady Cook, who's been there in that system for a while now. Luther Burden, who could be one of the top receivers off the board in next year's draft. And although they did lose a couple of dependable starters defensively, I just have a lot of faith in Eli Drinkwitz as a coach, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And then the rest is kind of up in the air. I had Tennessee 7. I just think that it's kind of a projection. I think that quarterback, the sophomore, Nico Iamaleava, I think is how you say his name. I'll have to work on that. He's really talented. I think he's the real deal. And I think they'll be good. They'll be in the conversation to maybe make the playoff in the SEC. And then after that, I think you get into a lot of question marks. Oklahoma, they have pretty much an entirely new offensive line. That's the question there. I love the wide receiver that they brought in, Deion Burks from Purdue. He's had a great spring. Jackson Arnold, we saw the great in the spring in the bowl game, but we also saw some bad. I think he'll work through some growing pains, especially behind a new offensive line. But we'll also see the moments where, wow, that guy could one day, a couple years down the road, maybe be a high-level quarterback in the NFL. They did return a lot on defense, which I like, because we know Brent Venables is a defensive guy. He knows how to make defenses into like the strength
units.
Yeah, elite units defensively. They returned Danny Stutzman, who is one of the better linebackers, I think, next year in the SEC. But they didn't get any breaks with their schedule. And I just think until we see the offensive line in a real game, there's a lot of question marks there. And then A&M, they're talented. Like, they're, in terms of talent, they're up there with Texas and Alabama. Maybe not on that level, but they're right there. It's all about Connor Weigman. And can he stay healthy? Can he perform like the quarterback we think he could be? Because he's really talented. And if he has a great season, he could be a first-round pick next year. It's just he hasn't had a lot of experience and a lot of snaps yet. And then it's about kind of how much can Mike Elko fix in year one. And we'll see about that. And then after that, it's really up to you. Like, I could definitely see Florida with Graham Mertz coming back at quarterback. He played really well last year. They did lose, a couple guys, important guys to that team, Ricky Pearsall, Trevor Etienne. And their schedule's so difficult that I just don't know what to think of Florida. They could be good and surprise people. They also could be really – they could struggle to get to 5 wins in some scenarios. And then Auburn's another interesting team. I think Hugh Freeze, the way that he's recruited, the way that he's portaled in talent, I think Auburn's going to be a better football team next year. It's just all about how Peyton Thorne, who has a lot of limitations as a quarterback, at least to what we've seen so far in his career, plays. So that's really what it is at this point. And then there's Kentucky, who's been a solid program. I think they have a top half coach in the SEC, Mark Stoops, who wins with more than he's given, and he does it consistently. They have a talented quarterback transfer from Georgia and Brock Vandegrift. But there will be some adjustment to that system. They did lose Ray Davis, who was an important player to that offense, as a running back who I think did get drafted eventually, right? So it'll be interesting, and it's still May, right? I mean, tomorrow's May. We've got a lot of time to hash things out and go deeper into this conversation, but I wanted to give you now an opportunity, since I've been talking for so long, to make any other points that you wanted to make.
I mean, I think we touched on everything already. I think A&M is an interesting team. I think if they are able to just be consistent in terms of effort and just attention to detail, they'll immediately take a big step up just from that alone. Like that, you mentioned the talent, and I think offensively, they're going to be able to put points on the board if Connor Wayne stays healthy. After he got hurt, it really took the wind out of their sails, and they weren't able to utilize the wide receiver talent that they have. And with him back, they've got a shot.
Yeah, I agree. Let's see. Did we miss anything in terms of big portal additions?
I do want to correct myself. Earlier, I said Caleb Downs returned to Alabama after transferring. I got that mixed up with the tackle that left to Iowa and then came back. I can't quite remember his name, but
yeah, Caden Proctor.
Yeah, Proctor. Right.
LSU, they, despite losing Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., they did bring in a couple good wide receivers, productive wide receivers at the college level to fill that void as best they can. They brought in CJ Daniels, who was a 1,000-yard guy and a double-digit touchdown guy at Liberty, who was in the New Year's Six Bowl last year. That's a good program for a G5. Texas was looking at that guy before they ended up with Matthew Golden and Isaiah Bond, along with Silas Bolden. So he's a high-level talent. And then Xavier Thomas, who I believe played at Mississippi State last year, he was a good player for them. And so I think that as a 1-2 punch in the wide receiver core could be really good for LSU. I just want to see a little bit more of Garrett Nussmeier. I don't know if you say it Nussmeier or Nussmeier, but yeah, I think we'll see. They do have guys to replace on that interior defensive line with the departures of Mason Smith, who got drafted pretty early on, and Mekhi Wingo, along with Quincy Wiggins. So we'll see what happens there, but I do think they'll take a step defensively, but it could still be another step that they'll have to take to become even an above-average defense. But I could be proven wrong there. And then Oklahoma is the interesting one to me because I do think they've recruited at a top 10 level nationally. Venables is doing a really good job on the recruiting trail. Um, they've done a good job in the portal trying to piece together this offensive line, so they're not playing all freshmen. But at the same time, you have a redshirt freshman quarterback who's started one game in his career, and you just have a lot of question marks on offense, along with we'll see what happens. It's a tough schedule. There will be an adjustment period. Missouri is the fascinating one for me because they went 11-2 last year, and they've got a lot of their big contributors coming back. My concern there would be kind of along with, I guess, who was it? Alabama, because they lost 2 NFL starting caliber, high draft picks in their secondary. Missouri lost Ennis Rakestraw and another corner. So both those teams will be relatively young in the secondary, but yeah, it'll be interesting. Okay. So with the time that we have remaining, and we might have to continue this conversation on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, whenever we do our next dit hole. I want to talk some Texas baseball. Is that okay with you?
Yeah. Let's do it.
Because we had it planned. So Texas right now, they're sitting at 28-18. They beat up on Sam Houston State tonight in the last midweek game of the season. I believe, won all but one of their Big 12 series to this point. The only loss was a home series loss to BYU a couple weeks back. They got a huge series win against the conference leaders right now in the Big 12, the Oklahoma Sooners, this weekend. They lost game 1, which they really struggled with to this point in the season. They're not winning Friday games as I thought they would. And they bounced back to win a doubleheader on Sunday after they got rained out on Saturday. They've got some big contributions, guys who are stepping up now in the lineup. They're starting to play some better baseball, and they find themselves at 28-18, 13-8 in the conference. I think 2 games behind OU and 1 game behind Oklahoma State, who's a team that they play in a 3-game series starting on Friday, this upcoming weekend, and what is a huge series for the Longhorns at the Dish in Austin. Then after that, they just have UCF on the road in a 3-game series, and then Kansas in a 3-game series. So there are 3 weekend series remaining. Texas is sitting at 28-18. They're sitting around somewhere in the 60s in the RPI. Think of it as a measure kind of like the net in college basketball. They do need to try to improve upon that RPI just a little bit to ensure
Like net rating, you mean? Like plus minus?
No. There's a metric in college basketball, kind of like KenPom, but it's the net. They call it the net. So I think it was UConn or Houston that was number 1 in the net. They used to call it RPI. Now they call it the net. It measures like strength of schedule and stuff.
Oh, okay. So it's more like just bracketology type of thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Texas is in the 60s there. They need to improve upon that a little bit, but they can do that by just winning series from here on out. Like Oklahoma State would do that. They need to ensure themselves a spot in the regional because a couple weeks back, it was a little iffy whether or not they were actually going to make it. They've been on the bubble for a while now. They've lost some bad midweek games to teams in the hundreds in the RPI. They didn't have a great non-conference. So I guess the question I'll ask you is, what have you seen or how much have you followed lately with Texas baseball? And what's your biggest like red flag or concern right now?
Well, I haven't been following as much lately, but the thing I've been hearing a lot is that the pitching has been
Yeah,
pretty hit or miss. The offense has been good for the most part.
yeah,
And as you mentioned, like in the game ones of 3-game series, if you're not going to win that game one, it really puts you in a tough spot.
yeah.
So they just got to be a little bit more consistent, I think. And I mean, there's not really anything negative I would say about the lineup. The lineup right now has been, I mean, they've had, stretches where they haven't hit, but for the most part over the course of an entire game sample, like they have an inning or two where they bring in 4 or 5 runs. So it's really just about the pitching to me. The bullpen too.
Yes. I think here's where I would start, right? This lineup, and I don't know, I would have, if you asked me before the season started, that I would have told you this, but no team has hit the long ball as well as 2024 Texas Longhorn baseball, meaning no team in Longhorn history. Um, they have, including tonight, with the 5 home runs they hit tonight, including 2 grand slams, they've hit 95 home runs in 46 games, which is the most of any Texas Longhorn team through that amount of games in school history. And they're 13 homers ahead of pace of the 2022 Texas team just 2 years ago that hit 128 home runs for the season, which I think was the most in school history. And so, with the rate that they're continuing to hit home runs and hit for power, I think it's a really good sign. They're starting to have better at bats here lately. They've won 7 out of their last 8 games. Peyton Powell and Jared Thomas at the top of the lineup have been staples all season long. Those guys have been good start to finish for the most part. They're getting on base. They're having good at bats. They're driving in runs. They've been the most consistent offensive players for Texas. Lately, we've kind of started to see other guys rise. I would actually add Jalen Flores into that conversation with Jared Thomas and Peyton Powell. He's been really good. He's already way past 10 home runs. I said before the season, I thought he was my breakout player, and I did say that I thought he could get into the double digits on home runs, and he's done that already. I need to look and see exactly how many he has, but he's well past 10 at this point. But my point is, like, you've seen Will Gasparino really get hot here in the past week. He's hit 3
The
home
freshman?
runs. Yeah, 3 home
Nice.
runs and 3 or 4 home runs in the past 4 games. Like, he's starting to hit. I think he's got 10 homers on the year. He's been really productive here as of late, which has resulted in more winning. And then Max Ballou, who has been a revelation for this Texas team. I think he's up to 16 or 17 home runs for the season. He's seeing the ball well. He's hitting to all fields, and that helps. It helps when you have a 6 or a 7-man lineup rather than just a 3 or a 4-man lineup. Porter Brown has kind of been on and off with his contributions in the middle of the lineup, but he's gotten going lately. They're going offensively, and that's a great sign, especially near the end of the season. The pitching is where where the major question mark is. And I think with all the shuffling and reshuffling that they've had to do on that side, it's a little worrisome. I think the biggest disappointment on this entire Texas team. And I thought this guy was going to be one of the better pitchers in America. But LeBaron Johnson Jr. just hasn't had the year that I think a lot of people thought he would have after the way that he finished last year, especially, throwing that complete game shutout in the regional. I just haven't seen it. He's had some good performances, but he got moved from a Friday starter to all the way out of the rotation to now being the Sunday starter. So he's been moved around a lot. He's pitched better as of late, but he just hasn't had the consistency. And the main problem with this pitching staff, like, they give up runs, yes, but a lot of times they're
Not throwing strikes.
not throwing strikes and allowing way too many free passes, putting guys on base, hitting guys with pitches. The command's been on and off. That's where they need to clean things up come a regional, because you can't be putting guys on base. You got to throw strikes and get people out. I would rather you throw strikes and give up 3 solo home runs than not be able to throw strikes, pitch around guys, load the bases, and end up giving up a crooked number in the inning.
Yeah.
That's where their problem has been generally. So, yeah, I mean, it's really the pitching that's the biggest question. We could talk about this more, but this Oklahoma State series coming up is going to be huge. They really need to win this series. I think there's 9 games left. They're 28-18. You like to be safe. You'd like to win 6 or 7 of them. So that's kind of where I stand. We'll talk about it more, but anything else you want to add?
Well, the not throwing strikes thing, like, it puts even more strain on the staff as a whole, just because you're throwing more pitches in a short amount of time, and then you're not getting length out of any guys. And it ends up being like you're throwing 4 or 5 guys out there every game.
Yeah. We got a comment here from Brandon Weeks. He says, "Keep up the good work. First time watching. Awesome work." Thank you. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. Please keep watching. And if you have friends that like sports, tell them to check us out. We greatly appreciate that. And thank you for watching us at 11:30 p.m. Central on a Tuesday.
It's pretty late, yeah.
But with our schedules, sometimes we have to do this. Yeah, I mean, we'll talk more as the postseason years for college baseball. We've got 3 more weekends in which we have regular season baseball. Then we're going to have the Big 12 tournament, which is where this year the top 10 teams in the regular season standings will make the Big 12 tournament, now that there's 14 teams in the Big 12. And then we'll get into the tournament. We'll see where Texas gets put in a regional. Hopefully they make a regional and they don't just fall apart here at the end of the season. I think there's an interesting conversation centered behind David Pierce and his job security, because the standard for Texas baseball is a lot higher than what we have seen this year. And the level of talent on campus right now is not great for moving into the toughest baseball conference, the SEC.
Yeah.
So we'll talk more about that. We'll get into a more broad college baseball conversation in another 1 or 2 weeks to talk about some of the top contenders going into the regionals, and then we'll go from there. tomorrow or Thursday, we're going to have a Major League Baseball episode, and we'll have another dit hole before Saturday, into Saturday. I don't know exactly when that will be. Have to talk about that off air, but keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, dit hole being deep in the heart of Longhorn sports, just to
Yes.
clarify. And the MLB episode will most likely it'll be a top 10 power rankings, and then we'll also get into some of the arm injuries as well.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the main things we'll talk about after the power rankings too. So
yeah, absolutely. Okay, guys. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, including Brandon. Thank you for your kind words. And we'll see you guys next time on the Raw Prospect Podcast and here on Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. Hook 'em horns and peace out.